you can answer for you.
Well, that is a very excellent question.
I think the nature of the question speaks to the very thing I talked about students' credibility being in doubt. What do we do with a first-year person who's been elected to the school board by the county? This is their first year. So they would be in a similar situation to a student member who is in their first year as well, in having to learn. Now, the student member, in fact, only has a year to serve. So my guess is, as a guess, they work extra hard so that they can have as much influence and as much understanding as possible in their short time as a school board member.
All right, thank you, folks.
Is the answer?
Delegate
Is there
Delegate Jalisi, that's like 5 questions, so I'm going to move on. Okay.
Okay.
I'm not just trying to give everybody some time.
No, that's fine. It's fine.
Delegate Mangione.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I kind of agree with Delegate Jalisi here, but my question, someone's brought to my attention. I appreciate, I lost their names. I can't see them on here, but the 2 students that are very involved, good for them. And I really respect that. But someone's brought to my attention here that you said 6 through 12-year-olds are voting. I'm sorry, 6 through 12th grade are voting on, I guess, like a student body representative. And it's just one per, the high school? How does it work? I'm sorry.
If I could chime in here.
Sure.
So BCSC controls the process of the selection of the student member of the board when it comes down to narrowing the pool of applicants. But every single high school in the county is able to put forth an applicant to apply to serve as a student member of the board. It's a very extensive screening process that requires upwards of 5 letters of recommendation. And they sit on a panel with the teacher of the year and the principal of the year, in addition to elected student council officers. And when they go through that process, then they're pushed forward to an interview process once their initial applications have been screened. From there, we interview about 5 students yearly. And then from there, it depends on the year, but we've had up to 3 students be pushed forward to a Q&A session. That Q&A session is broadcasted and available to every single secondary school in the county. And there is actually English class curriculum written to encompass the election. So it's in curriculum that students across the county should be hearing about the student member of the board election. And they should all be aware that it is their right to vote for their student representative. So from that point forward, when the speeches and the Q&A is released to students across the county, from there they're able to vote on their representative. If that clarifies your question.
No, yeah, I appreciate it, because my concern, I have a lot of concerns with it, but I think that definitely helps clear things up, because when I hear that 6th graders, what are probably 11, 12 years old, are voting for a representative that's going to vote on over a $1 billion budget, it just doesn't seem like it's appropriate to me. But at least there's a much further screening, which I appreciate. You really did clear that up. Like I said, I have concerns, but I appreciate your answer, and that was exactly what I needed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before moving on, just wanted to let everyone know we are live now. If anybody is watching this, we will attach the first half of the first piece of testimony to our YouTube channel, so you can marry up both. Delegate Kramer, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions for Mr. Thomas. I understand you're a Maverick. Is that the case? Is that true?
Yes, I am an Eastern Tech student.
There you go. Eastern Tech alumni.
Thought maybe it was a character question there, Mr. Graham.
Well, you can't call yourself a Maverick until you're the only one voting no, but I'll digress. Greetings from class of 98. What area do you live in?
I live in Essex. I live in District 6.
Excellent. So do I.
Follow-up question, Delegate Kramer?
Yes. What's your field of study?
I'm in the allied health profession at Eastern Tech, but I don't want to go in allied health. I want to study political science.
Understood. So there's some bigger questions regarding the election of the student board member that I think would be very prudent to look at before, frankly, just advocating for more power for yourself. And a couple of the previous delegates mentioned this, like the election factor. Can you imagine if this delegation were to try and select the people that would run against us in the next election? is it prudent to have a student council narrow the pool of applicants? If we're looking for reform here, shouldn't we look at issues like maybe just allowing any student to be on the final ballot, or maybe even like transparency issues? I've been trying to get the Board of Education phone numbers and emails on their site. A big part of the problem with education policy is this delegation, frequently, we don't have authority to deal with a lot of these issues. And frequently I'm saying, call Mr. Thomas, call Mr. McMillan, call Miss Rowe. And I don't have a number to say, can you please, here's how you reach out to them. So before we go about advocating for more authority for ourselves, shouldn't we look at maybe those issues first? If this is a real voting franchise, shouldn't people have an access to run if they wanted to indeed run against you?
You know, Delegate Grammer, I welcome you to submit legislation like that if you feel that's important, but I don't think that's generic to the concept that the student member of the board is very well informed and also needs this voting skill to be able to follow through on the other voting abilities that they have. Thank you for your suggestion. I just don't think that this bill is about how they get elected, but thank you.
I appreciate the question.
If I may add as well, I just wanted to
Go ahead. Go ahead, Samantha.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that we have made great strides in the transparency of this process over the last 5 years specifically. This student member of the board used to be voted on in kind of like an electoral college model, if you will, where middle and high schools sent representatives, handpicked representatives to a forum to elect their student member. As soon as the Baltimore County Student Councils had begun taking a broader look at student board voting rights, as well as just the role of the student member of the board in general, we immediately took issue with this. And that is why now we offer the election to every single secondary school student in the county. And that is not to say that we don't see this process further evolving to be more transparent, inclusive, and accessible to all students in the future. But I just wanted to make it known that we have made great strides in that area.
It's important to note too that the student council, they're elected. Okay, they're not appointed. They're elected by students as well. So the ones who are participating in that initial process.
Delegate Szeliga.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here, Samantha and Christian. And you do play a vital role. I have had the pleasure of having 2 student members from the Harford County School Board work for me in the past. One just stopped working for me. He was just an amazing guy. Both a woman and a man were wonderful. So I know the value that you bring to the board. I do have some questions about the financial aspects. Christian, what is the school board budget?
Is the school board budget?
Yes.
Are you referring to like the operating budget or the capital budget?
The total, either, both?
How much they are?
Yes.
I believe it's 2.312 billion was the last year's budget. I don't know the exact number for this year's total budget, but I think this question, would you ask this question to another board member?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Like, you should know that if you want to vote on the budget. So do you vote, excuse me, do you weigh in? I'm assuming your parents' family budget is much less than that. I mean, certainly mine and everyone on this call is. So do you weigh in with your parents' family budget? Do you help them manage that? I'm wondering what kind of experience you have managing money of any number, especially something that's, $2 billion plus.
Well, thank you for this question, but I feel as though it's kind of highlighting the fact that maybe students might not have the ability to understand a budget, and that's maybe what you're trying to get to with me to answer this question. I think that's kind of unfair because there are 11 other board members who are not required to have any financial background to vote on the budget. They are not required to have a master's degree in financial literacy. They're not required to have any sort of background in budgetary matters to be elected into their role. But yes, I do play a significant part in the budgeting of my family and of my own budgetary issues and my own management of my budget as a student member who works 2 jobs on top of being a Baltimore County student member of the board. I would hope that these questions are in good faith and not trying to target me as an individual student.
Oh, I would never target you. And I'm glad you asked that question because, again, I'm very proud of the student members that have worked for me. And I know how hard they work, and I don't question, that I would never imply that. So I'm glad that we straightened that out. But I do think that it is germane to the topic here that the other members of the school board do have significant family budgets that they manage, and many of them manage a business budget. So, the concern when student member voting was addressed many years ago, and it's been expanded, was does someone who's a teenager have the ability and the experience, the life experience of managing this amount of money? And that's why I asked those questions, not to impugn you, but to just kind of drill down to the fact that you don't and you can't because you're a teenager. They're just, with age comes wisdom. And this is a big budget. This is a lot of money. And, so I have some serious concerns. There are reasons when students were given voting rights that the budget and collective bargaining and a couple of other things were excluded from their authority and ability. So I'm just getting to the fact that you just couldn't possibly have that experience because you're a teenager. But it doesn't mean that you're not a valuable member, that you don't serve a great role on that school board, and that your being in the school system isn't a very valuable input into the process. Thank you.
Samantha, I see your hand up. I'm just going to let you make your point in a second. Thank you, Delegate Schlager, for highlighting one of the very problems that exists with the student member of the board and their treatment. Your cross-examination of him, if he participates in his family budget, I wonder if every other Board of Ed member has been queried if they participate in their family budget. And in fact, it's possible that someone else in their family handles it. And so these questions actually are a bit of a cross-examination based on age. And I bring to your attention a recent student member of the board, Omar Rashid, who has been highlighted by Baltimore County as having joined a real estate firm at the age of 19, a teenager, if you will, and he has outperformed the other members of this real estate agency by 5 times. This indicates the ability of a student member of the board to have financial wherewithal. And just as all the rest are untested when they come into office, so is our student member of the board, but some of them really know how to shine. And again, by asking him questions that you asked him, I wonder if you would be comfortable asking the other members of the board that question. And I'm not going to state that as a question. I'm just
you did, and I will answer it. Absolutely, Eric.
So what answers do you have from them on that matter?
Fiduciary, that bill's not before us, Eric.
There's no bill. I'm just saying, have you asked the other members of the board that question?
Well, we're not here talking about the other members. So I'd be happy to do that, Delegate Ebersol.
We're not going to have questions from the panel going back to the members who are asking questions. So we won't get into a back and forth like that. Samantha, you did have your hand up and I'll let you go, and then I don't see any other questions.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to kind of highlight, I guess, kind of the underlying but most prominent factor in voting on the capital and operating budget. The money is clearly an important and key and critical. I mean, it's the budget, it's financial matters. But what the money is going toward, the student member brings an invaluable perspective when it comes to the direction of those finances. The adult board members are not students. They are not sitting in school buildings every day and seeing firsthand where resources could be better allocated. The student vote on this matter, it's one student serving on this board. If that vote can simply be the vote that says and sends the message, sure, I may not have the background in finances that someone else does. I may have the same background in those finances. If that student knows where the direction of that money and those allocations could be best suited, I think that is an invaluable position that needs to be highlighted and needs to be at the forefront of this conversation, as opposed to, in addition to the experience of the student. But I think we need to refocus the conversation and center it on the fact that the student brings in that invaluable perspective in terms of where money is needed.
Thanks, Samantha. I see one last question from Delegate Forbes, and we're going to move on to the opposite. You're unmuted, Delegate.
2 years in and I'm still not there. Sorry, everyone. Thank you, Chair Young. Delegate Ebersol, thanks for bringing this bill. Christian and Samantha, I am inspired by both your intellect and your passion. Thank you. I have a practical question. There are 11 voting members of the board who vote on the capital and operating budget. If we add the student member as a voting member, is it possible we could get caught in ties? And what happens when a tie happens in the Board of Education? Is there what's the process for resolving that? Thank you.
May I answer? Thank you.
Sorry, Christian, go ahead. You can.
Yes. So on any other matter, like besides the budget right now, yes, there's the opportunity for ties. There are, I mean, you all know the Board of Education of Baltimore County can be quite contentious at times and split. So if there's a 6-6 vote, then let's say there was an amendment made to the budget, that amendment would fail. And if you refer back to the capital budget, there was a 5-6 vote. If the student member could have voted against the amendment, then it would not have passed. But if we voted for the amendment, then it would have passed as well. So if there's a tie, it wouldn't pass whatever the motion was.
Delegate Forbes, you're free to.
Thank you. But what would happen if there was a tie in the vote on the operating budget?
Oh, are you referring to like the final vote of whether or not to approve it? Well, then it would not be approved in the way that it was currently written, and there would have to be further discussion on the board. I don't actually know what would exactly happen after that. Maybe there would be continued conversations, or the superintendent's budget would go directly to the county executive.
I appreciate your answers.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you being here this morning.
Delegate Madara, I see that your hand's up. If you don't mind, I'm going to move on to let Lily Rowe, board member for Baltimore County Public Schools, speak, and then I'll bring it back to you, okay?
Sure.
Board member Rowe, welcome.
Morning, how are you?
Morning, and when you're ready, you have 3 minutes.
All right.
When you're ready.
Hello, my name is Lily Rowe. I'm a member of the Baltimore County Board of Education. I represent the 6th district, and I'm here speaking for myself. And my opinion is not a representation of the full Board of Education. My email address is lrowe@bcps.org, and my personal cell phone number, as the school system does not provide me a professional number, is 410-978-2111. For Delegate Grammar. Children have no historic right to vote. The right to vote belongs to those over 18. Additionally, elections have specific laws governing them. Members of elected bodies have specific laws that would govern them, including but not limited to the filing of financial disclosure forms, which students do not do, governance by the State Board of Elections, which students do not do, and various other ethics laws. Additionally, the District Court in Maryland established that a student member of the Board of Education is an appointed and not an elected member of the Board of Education. As an appointed member of the Board of Education, the General Assembly, which establishes the way in which all appointed members are appointed, is well within their right to both grant and revoke privileges given to appointed members of the Board of Education. This is important because it establishes that a student member of the Board of Education has no intrinsic civil right to vote on any particular matter. It is both appropriate and necessary that the General Assembly decide the scope of juvenile participation on the Board of Education. Who does have rights? All those over 18 with the right to vote in Maryland have rights by virtue of their suffrage rights. The moment the General Assembly decided that the Board of Education was going to be at least in part an elected body, all those with suffrage rights were granted rights over the budgets of the Baltimore County Public Schools through the elected Board of Education members. This is appropriate because historically representation is heavily based on the idea that we should not have taxation without representation. And as the school system is paid for entirely by tax dollars, it makes sense that all those with suffrage rights should have a right through elections to determine the expenditure of tax revenue. The question then becomes, should the legitimate civil rights of adult tax-paying voters via the elected members of the board be diluted by allowing a juvenile to decide how taxes are spent? This is the question the General Assembly must decide. Is this appropriate? I would hope that as the General Assembly is elected by adults with suffrage rights who pay taxes, that this body would consider how the people who elected them think on the subject with the profound weight that is appropriate compared to the emotional plea of children who don't really understand that none of their rights are being violated by denying the student member a vote on the board because these students don't have the right to vote in the first place. While I have no objection to the student member voting on most things, there are specific reasons not to allow the student member to vote on budget matters, some of which protect all students. One, the student member of the board is only on the board for 1 year. The first year of the board, every board member learns the budget process. It's a steep learning curve for even the most educated adult with decades of life and professional experience. Students who have not completed their education and have zero professional experience might be able to grasp some of the concepts to understand the budget, but if they sat on the board for more than 1 year, but as they are only there, yes?
If you could summarize, please.
Okay, so the three main reasons is that lack of experience, but also exploitation. The student member of the board and the entire process is decided by the central office, and the same reason that we do not allow the superintendent as the secretary treasurer of the Board of Education to vote on budgets is the same reason that we should not allow the student member, because this will also subject a student who's on the board for their educational benefit to be subjected to the political process without the same protections that other elected members have or the same oversight as far as the State Board of Elections, and their education rights and the right to receive an education without free from exploitation and free from political lobbying of school system personnel.
Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Let me open it up for questions. Delegate Madari. You're muted, Harry. Sorry, Delegate, you're muted.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm so honored listening Christian and Samantha, and we are not, and we will not, and we shall not question on your commitment, and confidence, and we should not seek to limit your influence. And I commend your effort putting more power behind all our like county student voices. The question is, if they have a knowledge, or you guys have a knowledge about the budget. And my question would be to the delegate Eversole, can we not teach them the budgetary process? Because without the instruction, nobody can be inspired or engaged. And I think that if they don't have a knowledge about the budget, and you know, they're trying to put their more power behind their voices, and why we can't teach about the budget process, might be 10 days or 15 days. Is there any possibility that you could amend on the bill, if that is the concern?
So you're suggesting that they go through a training on the budget? Is that what you're suggesting? So
yes.
only if we require other board members to go through the same training. These are board members. These are student members of the board. I sometimes think we should remove the word student. We only do it because we know they come from students. They are members of the board. And so if you're going to require them to go through some sort of training, there's no reason to assume that the other members of the board don't need a similar training. I think it's a great idea, but let's have all 12 members of the board go through this training.
I would support that amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Hill.
Thank you. Delegate Eversole, could you address the issue that, you know, of institutional knowledge, or 1 year, most of the other board members are there for a period of time, and even though they have a first year, presumably, you know, other members have been there longer. Could you specifically address the question of the fact that the student member is there for just a year?
Yeah, I can actually. They have a lot of experience being a student in Baltimore County schools before they get there. I wonder if the other board members were required to go and attend Baltimore County schools. Some may have, but there's no requirement for them. These people who become the members of the board have probably been in Baltimore County schools for quite a number of years. And so they come from a position of understanding how the school works, which is the value, the extra value of what they bring in this particular case. And then of course, we've drilled down pretty hard in a number of cases about how they understand the budget. And the same question applies to others, but I think they provide us with a wealth of experience actually.
And Delegate, could you also clarify under the current status, if they're not allowed to vote on the budget, are they allowed to participate in the discussion? And is what they have to say about the budget taken into consideration as the other members vote on it? Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a number of limitations on the student members of the board. And actually, they asked if we could even release some of the other limitations. I said, let's start with this one, which I consider most important. First of all, they are not even allowed, they can be held out of meetings on special education placements and issues under Article 6202, which has to do with relieving people of duty, or even collective bargaining. They're not allowed to be in the room when it comes to listening to arguments on the collective bargaining agreement. They're not allowed to vote on collective bargaining also, but why would they if they're not allowed to be in the room and hear about it? They're not allowed to vote on school closings and reopenings and boundaries. But capital operating budget seems like a good first step for them. So there's a number of things, there's a number of limitations on them. This is the one that we feel like is the most significant for them in terms of backing up policy.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, Christian, thank you. I believe Samantha had to step off to get to school, and appreciate the testimony. And we'll move on to the next bill on our list. HB 261, Baltimore County Career Exploration and Development Act activities in public high schools, prohibiting a ban or regulation of sale of coffee. Delegate Grammer, is this the Java Act again? I just wanted
This, for the 8th consecutive year, Mr. Chair, is the Java Act. And
just wanted to confirm you're ready to go when you're talking.
Because you've heard it, I'll be very brief. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Delegate Robin Grammer to present House Bill 261. House Bill 261 protects local autonomy in the student sale of caffeinated beverages as part of a career exploration program in Baltimore County public high schools. Current schools in southeastern Baltimore County and western Baltimore County are protected under the current law. Parkville High School is asking for an amendment to the current language so that they can participate, as the current language precludes their participation. This has passed multiple times through the House. It has stalled in the Senate due to various, I'll call them congestion issues over the past several years. I will beg the forgiveness of Delegate Ebersol. We talked about an amendment, and in my haste, I did not add the amendment which we adopted. I will get that drafted and send it over. Excuse me, I'm fine with the amendment, which would limit it to career exploration activities. And I'll get that over. With that, I'll be happy to take questions, and I'd ask for a favorable report.
Questions for Delegate Grammer, and for those that are unfamiliar with the Java Act, my laughing was more of the fact that we've seen it so many times. We have passed it out of this chamber and this delegation multiple times. So let's see, Delegate Guyton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, you just answered my question. I thought we had passed this bill last year with that particular amendment through the House, and I just wanted to verify that was the case. So it didn't make it through the Senate. Is that what happened?
That's correct.
Great. Thank you for that information.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Jalisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just have one question is there a Senate co-sponsor for this?
No, there's not.
And then the second question is, I'm looking at the fiscal note, and the fiscal note I'm reading, I think it's probably for last year. It says that the coffee sales are allowed in high schools which were already participating in 2018. So have you seen, are there new high schools that were built which you are asking to allow coffee sales since 2018?
So here's the history of the bill. We drafted it clean, and the first time it passed with a sunset, and then additional schools. I believe there was a school in your district that asked for the program, so we drafted it again, and the sunset was removed, but the grandfathering clause was put in, and that passed. Now we have an additional school asking, Parkville is asking, but they can't utilize, they're being told they can't do it with the grandfather clause in place. So we would have to alter the language one more time, and we're hoping to pass it clean this time so that every time a new school wants to have access to the program, they can do so within Baltimore County.
Sir, my question was different, I think. I was asking you the number of schools that are not participating in the program. Are we doing this for one school, which is in Parkville, or are there substantial number of schools?
So there are,
Because all the schools, it seems like, were participating in this program as of June 30th, 2018.
so there are 5, I believe, last time I had checked. The Dana Evans, who is the FOWLS teacher. Last time I had spoke with her, there were approximately 5 schools. I don't have that list, but I can get it to you.
Okay.
The problem is every time a new one comes in, we have to move another bill.
And when you say that schools ask for it, is it coming from the administration or the student council, or where are you getting these requests, or just students themselves?
So the FOWLS teachers get pushed back, and they say that, well, under current law, you didn't get in before the grandfather clause, so we have to change the law to get access to the program for Parkville.
So I'm not familiar with this. Is it student council or school administration for these 5 schools?
That would be
Who's asking for it?
So who is asking for the bill is Dana Evans, who is the FOWLS teacher, functional academic learning support. And those are generally the programs for students with cognitive issues. And she's asking specifically for the bill. She's been the main proponent. And the where she's getting pushback is the administration from Parkville High School.
So basically, this bill is from Dana Evans, who takes care of students with cognitive disorders, and you think that coffee is going to help them?
So it's for the FOWLS program teachers. They're the group who's continuously asked for the expansion or the allowance of the program. And Dana Evans, she was the one that really back in the day, she put the program in place in Patapsco. She ended up transferring schools to the west side. She put it in place there, and now she's trying to get it done in Parkville.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Grammer, just again, we passed this already out of this delegation, right?
That is correct, Mr.
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Ebersol.
Thanks, Delegate Grammer, for referencing you did say that we wrote an amendment that limited it to career, but actually we wrote an amendment that limited it to use by groups that students that have IEPs, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't remember the specific language, but it did limit it, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I looked it up from last year. It says if the activity is directed at or organized by students with individualized education programs. If you could add that in, and
sure.
It's easy to find in the bill last year. Thanks.
Yep.
Delegate Mondari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Grammer, trying to help our high school, Perry Hall. Actually, it is in District 8. The Delegate Eversole mentioned the amendment. Delegate Grammer, could you please share what was the concern on the Senate side that we could make adjustment on this? We really work hard on this bill and passed it. And could you please let us know what was the concern on the Senate side?
Delegate Bondari, isn't that the question for the ages? What's the concern on the Senate side? I don't know. I asked, so the first time it failed over there was when COVID hit, and if you remember that year, there were just a lot of things that weren't passing. Last year, I was advised, it went to Senate Education, Health and Environment. And if you remember, it was a big police reform year, and there were a lot of things that just weren't passing. I never got it. Again, I never got a specific answer, but the feeling I got was that there was just congestion and a lot of things weren't moving. So anything you can do to help expedite this, to get it over there, to see what's going on in the Senate, I'm sure the teachers and the students at Parkville would really appreciate your help.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Seeing no further questions, we will move on to HB 265, which is also Delegate Grammer's Baltimore County Nuisance Actions Community Association standing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Delegate Robin Grammer to present House Bill 265. House Bill 265 alters the qualifications used to determine standing for community associations when seeking relief for nuisance actions. This was originally Senator Sidnor's bill, which I went on to cross-file in the House when he moved to the Senate. This bill has passed both the House and the full House and the full Senate, but not in the same year. This particular section of code was enacted in 1997 in response to growing problems of community blight in Baltimore County. The current language of this section is use prohibitive. Specifically, the household dues and bonding requirements under this code make use of the code completely impractical. Baltimore County has a massive and growing problems with nuisance properties. Most frequently, the problems center around the health issues related to trash and/or rats. One problematic actor can create a huge problem for a street or for a community. The section of code exists for a purpose. It should be functional, and we should update it as necessary. This bill attempts to make it functional so that we can attempt to fix community blight issues that impact the poor communities of the county. Thanks for the opportunity to present House Bill 265. Be happy to take questions, and I'd ask that we advance the bill, which has moved through the delegation in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Grammer. Real quick before we get into questions, when did it pass the House and then not the Senate?
Oh, me, oh my. I believe it passed the House last year, and I believe it passed the Senate 2 years ago. I'm just recalling that from my memory. If you like, I can trace back through the bills and get an answer for the delegation.
Yeah, well, we could get that, and we'll have Barb look at that too, just to confirm when we
Sure.
go through here. Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Grammer, is this bill exactly the same as the one last session?
Yes, ma'am.
And so my understanding, I thought, was that basically it just expands what can qualify as a community association, but I got a little confused reading MMHA's testimony that it seemed like it was also expanding what can qualify as a nuisance action. Could you explain on that?
So it does not change what qualifies as a nuisance action. What it does change is what you have to, what a community association would have to do to qualify for standing under this type of issue. And here is how community associations in general have changed. And really it all traces back to the original concerns with the bill. So I have a lot of, let's say, for example, row home communities in my district. If I have a 300 house row home community, which is not a stretch by any, practical example, I might have to have 120 houses as either monthly or yearly paying dues members. I'm going to have them all registered. And I'm then, as a community association, going to have to statutorily put the money forward for a bond. So in my community association here in Essex, we'll put together activities, but we actually don't need money. Not only is it's hard to solicit volunteers, it's hard to raise money and get people to on paper, be contributing members, but we just don't need the money. And when it comes to like a bond issue, and so a judge can say at any time, we're going to require, if you're going to bring this issue, and the judge would let it proceed, a judge could say, we're going to require a bond for this particular case. There's what this section of language does, and this was brought up by a lot of the advocates in 1997, and they suggested we strike this particular section. They said a bond is completely preclusive. The fact that you would ask a community association to put a bond forward to try and remediate a community blight issue totally precludes the use of this section. And it has done so. If you listen to the testimony of Senator Sidnor, it's made the use of this section completely impractical. And I could forward the original bill file to you. I believe it was one of the Randallstown Community Association mentioned that in testimony. But that's the purpose of the reform. What this bill seeks to address is the who. Who should be able to use this section of code? Is it strictly the more wealthy community associations? What you have 70 houses, you could register 23 of them, and they can afford all this. Or should the more poor community associations with problems, should it be functional for them as well? And I believe the answer to that is yes.
Thank you, Delegate Grammer.
Thank you.
Delegate Jalisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have two questions. Since you mentioned Senator Sidnor, was he a co-sponsor of this bill, a cross-filer last year, and is he this year?
So he was the original sponsor of the bill. And being that he was in the House, it was just him. And then the bill moved, and then he went to the Senate. And then he, at one point, sponsored the Senate side, and I sponsored the House side. I believe that was the year it moved in the Senate and didn't have time to get through the House. I think the subsequent year, I got it through the House, but he didn't file it in the Senate. I believe that particular year, he just had so many bills that he had just wanted me to work it. We do not have a Senate cross file this year.
So am I understanding it right that last year and this year he did not cross file it?
I believe that to be the case.
Okay. My other question is, would you, I understand your argument about the bond issue. I understand it's difficult for community organizations to put up a bond, and sometimes the bond requires cash deposit, and community organizations don't have it. But what I don't understand is why you're repealing all the requirements to be qualified as a community organization. And here's my concern, and you can answer it. Is anybody can form a community under your bill, if it passes, anybody can form a community organization in, let's say, Reisterstown, which is under your definition, doesn't require membership, doesn't require everything else that's required to be a community organization in a particular neighborhood, and then block anything in your neighborhood, in your district. And I find it very difficult to understand. I understand your argument about bond, but what is the argument for allowing words like other organizations or community organizations which are not local to where the development is supposedly taking place or the nuisance is taking place?
So I would, yeah, absolutely. So I would actually challenge that directly. And I think your question is very appropriate, because that seems to be the concern, is that if we, hypothetically, if we change this language, there will be any organization that could, you know, take action on this. And I just don't, reading the language of the bill, I don't think that is the case whatsoever. The bill as drafted requires it to be within the legal qualifications of community association. It requires the boundary, and it requires anytime you put together a community association, it has to be incorporated on the state and county lists and in good standing with the State Department of Taxation, the Department of Assessments and Taxation. So under the bill as drafted, all of the same requirements are still there. I think what the language does, and Senator Sidnor talked about this the first year he sponsored the bill, is when they have like a community association that doesn't have a whole lot of members, it gets, you know, it's hard to act within the strict guidelines of the current section, and it just loosens that a little bit. So I understand the concern, which we've heard several times, but I believe if you just read through the bill, it really does limit, you know, the applicability of this section to organizations that have a legal bound, are legally registered, represent a geographic area, and are on good standing with both the county and the state.
But it still doesn't answer my question. I could be a Reisterstown resident trying to bring up these issues in Essex or Dundalk or Parkville or White Marsh, because you've removed the membership requirement. I can register a community organization called Essex Community Association, but I'm not required to have actual local people who may or may not be affected by the so-called nuisance issue, right?
No. If you look through the language as posed, the current language is as written prohibits that, and this bill doesn't do anything to change that.
So what is meant by other organizations then in your bill? What do you define them?
So if you have like the community law center, which represents frequently community associations. Because as, like I said, we take, for example, the Essex Community Association. We don't have money. We don't need money. With that said, if we had a legal issue where we wanted to bring a lawyer on, the Community Law Association, what they do is they represent community associations. So, you know, they could step in and say, okay, we're going to help you on this case. They might act pro bono, but they could act with us on our behalf. And I think that's the intention here, is to allow that kind of representation.
The Community Law Center is going to be
Delegate
representing
Gillespie.
a community association,
Delegate Gillespie.
not by itself. Yes, sir.
Just want
I'm
to.
just trying to get an answer to the question.
No, of course, I understand. And I think it sounds like not a miscommunication, just in terms of reading and then the intent. So if you two wouldn't mind discussing offline, so we don't get into this back and forth.
That's fine. Thank you, Delegate Graham, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, sir. And seeing any other questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, there is only one letter of opposition from the Multi-Housing Association that you all should have from the Baltimore County delegation. That is the last piece for our agenda today. If any housekeeping before we adjourn, if anybody has any organizations, Baltimore County specific, that you would like to bring to my attention or would like to present in front of the delegation during the 2022 session, feel free to contact me or Barb in the delegation office so we can consider that and also schedule it into our proceedings. With that, thank you all again. We'll be here the same time next week. Motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.